There's something that seems to be so often missed when we're articulating the psychology around what it means to be human and what it means to experience life in an objective sense. It can be easy to go through the mind and recognize the way in which we identify, dissect, articulate anything that we're perceiving. But I think what gets missed is realizing that as we're dissecting an element of our experience, we're missing something about the essence and the core, always. If we want to look at the manifestation of pain, or the manifestation of suffering or judgment, it's easy to form nice ideas and pretty concepts and find ways in which we can hold them to a standard, a set standard that we more or less unconsciously all agree upon, based on a certain set of things that we've come to understand via our conditioning, socially, environmentally, politically. And that goes into basic standards of social engagement and propriety and ways of behavior, ways that bring us in, make us belong to a culture, social structure, community. And also ways in which behaviors that are deemed inappropriate or unknown, confusing, chaotic, different, are more or less still, even as we evolve culturally, socially, economically, are still held and sitting in the same arena, judged in the same way. Something that at its core justifies division that occurs between people. That state of survival, in essence, because based on these standards, it's like you have these qualities, you have these behaviors, you are valuable in some way based on, I don't know, how you make someone feel or how you can fit in and comply with the standards of safety and engagement that have been unconsciously set up in set social circumstance or set conditions of reality. And what this does is creates a insecurity, a fundamental lack of connection to an innate sense of being, something outside of the mental conditioning or these rules of behavior and engagement that we all more or less, based on our survival, need to adhere to. Because when it comes down to the fear of being safe, the fear of being welcomed, the fear of being like unneeded and unwanted and exiled from a community, more often than not, we will dislodge any connection to these places that are innately wrong or innately unwanted, unacceptable, whatever it is, that differ from this set norm. And by doing so, we'll disconnect from our core essence and from our innate natural tendencies, the innocent way in which we already are as children, as we're being conditioned into these social things. So our joy, our spontaneity, our ability to be crazy, messy, disordered, creative, imaginative, all of it will get molded, suppressed, disconnected in some way or another. And then through this, we become more contained within this mental matrix that we're holding on to, this mental structure. And what this does is it disconnects us from the core reality of who we are into a compensatory, reptilian-like survival autopilot, almost like a matrix of its own self. It's a matrix of our own conditioning that responds, reacts, and behaves in a way in order to keep itself contained and keep itself in good standing in this infrastructure, so that it can feel safe and like its life is valuable, and not going to be thrown out of the tribe, thrown out of the reality of this world, I don't know, thrown out of belonging. And whether we agree or adhere to this or not, there's a particular way in which our fixation on the objective, on the image of what something looks like, can be heavily distorted. Like heavily distorted. Whereas the behavior is modeled after a set way in which we're meant to behave, but underneath this behavior is actually an inherently violent, vicious, distorted, unhappy, competitive, jealous, superficial, like twisted up thing that's completely different than what it is showing itself to be. It's the thing in us that in survival will knock everyone down when it gets the chance. It's the thing in us that instead of living from a place of our heart and compassion, it will flick its switch into judgment wherever that sense of value has shifted. Socially, if someone is stirring the pot, it will suddenly, instead of doing the thing that might be the most true and connected to its own core, it will go against that natural tendency and agree. It will take the side. It will justify the side. It will hold to. You see what I mean? It's an extremely vicious and disconnected, superficial way of connecting to community. Divided way. That will, even against its better judgment, and you witness this all the time, ignore the violence, ignore the judgment, ignore the wrongness at its core, that at its essence is obviously there and present, because it doesn't want to be seen, it doesn't want to be wrongly perceived, or perceived as siding with something that's being excluded and denied from a group setting. So strange, but it's true. If we look at any model of social dynamics straight from elementary school, it begins in school and then it moves up into like high school, politics there and social standing there and cliques and all of these ways of engagement and bullying and vicious ways that we learn to relate to each other so that we can feel safe and knock other people down to justify and validate that safety for familiarity and being a certain way. Seems to be the mode, and then that carries on, and then it doesn't go away. That social standing is inherently juvenile and very primitively survival based, and that goes on and on and on throughout our human psychology and relating to work environments, to dating environments, any element of friendship, connection, environments. It's a social program. And the social program keeps everyone in line, happy to be controlled, content that once that sense of belonging has been procured, then the only thing to do is try to, continue to climb up that ladder or hold the place in the social sphere. And whether we'll admit to it or not, we're being constantly bombarded by the different ways in which this conditioning gets validated. We're manipulated through it by culturally the way that our fears and insecurities around survival show up. It's always based on image. It's based on our own fears of not appearing to fit into something. Which all comes down from an inherent, fear, right? It's an inherent fear, the survival fear, but it's also an inherent hatred of the way things are, hatred of our nature as it is, and a need to manipulate or procure or organize it into a certain set of standards and ways to feel safe. Because the more that we are defined by these ways that we identify ourselves, the more that we become rigid in our mental standards and our conditioning and our functionality, the more that anything that taps at or pushes at or presses against this or is witnessed as being outside of it induces a sense of a sensation of some sorts that's going to activate fear, or it's going to activate within us unconsciously or somewhat consciously a realization, a recognition of that very thing that we've disconnected from ourselves, within ourselves, and divided against and are essentially bullying. And so we will in turn bully or push back in the same violent manner to the thing that is demonstrating that to us naturally, which is the fucking paradox of it, right? And there's so much more intricacy to it. And just the way that we're groomed, in essence, to hold idolatry, to project and pedestal different ways and types of being, especially through media, social media, through movies, through the beauty industry, through everything that we're constantly getting influx of, that literally it's like, you must look this way to reverse your aging, be a certain way, wear certain clothes, behave a certain way, do a certain thing, all of this stuff. It's just if you hold the image and the image that is just being shown in our face, then it's that's accepted. And we're forgetting, we're almost pulling ourselves away from, disconnecting and pulling ourselves away from what is actually real, what is really going on underneath the image. And I know that we're also in recognition of this, but there's a way that the program encroaches upon and holds on to all of us. And if we go and drop into different layers, if we're working through our own conditioning, if we're coming in and meeting this discomfort and this muck that is essentially part of who we are and part of what we are, and healing it, resolving it, and feeling it, navigating through it, we're still, in essence, always reaching a threshold in which we can't comply or go, we can't any longer, and then we return to compliance. Because the program doesn't exactly want us to escape the program, right? Liberation from that. In essence, if it isn't triggering or activating some part of us that probably is meant to be in the program, it's triggering and it's creating an an experience of reality in the external world where you'll be isolated and rejected and denied and pushed out of all culture and community and connection, become an outsider. And the sin of becoming an outsider, it's like the witch wound, the martyr wound, like these holier than thou, intense archetypal wounds will be met. And in that, it's another challenge. So the question it really comes into, it's like, okay, so we either adhere to a certain set standard and way of being. And if we do, then perhaps our nervous system, our life, our sense of value and being valuable, valued, will shift and alter, and we'll become comfortably acclimatized to being this way. And live our lives, do our normal things. Become blind to the horror and the ugliness and the dividedness and the way in which this behavior, this conditioning actually feels in the body, for the heart. For the heart.